Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday school class this morning. We're continuing through our look at the book of 2 Kings. We're in chapter 10. And last week we started with this kind of war path that Jehu is on. And if you recall, Jehu is actually carrying out the Lord's judgment that occurred way earlier in this. There's the dynasty of Omri, who is in the northern kingdom, and his dynasty has continued down for generations. And King Ahab was kind of the worst example of his dynasty. And at that time, God made some judgments against that household, and this is going down now and finally coming to fruition in Jehu. And Jehu isn't done yet. Last week he killed Jezebel, and this week he's going to have a lot more things to do, and he's going to do them in some very interesting ways. And so we'll talk about all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and start 2 Kings chapter 10. Let's start in verse 1, and we'll read the first paragraph, which goes all the way down to verse 11.
Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria, so Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying, Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, Behold, the two kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand? So he who was over the palace and he who was over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu, saying, We are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes. Then he wrote to them a second letter, saying, If you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city, who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him, They have brought the heads of the king's sons, he said, Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning. Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, You are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him, but who struck down all these? Now know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah. So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left him none remaining.
Okay, so lots going on here, and there's actually a lot of interplay of words and puns and stuff like that going on that we don't immediately get, even though a lot of them actually translate pretty well from Hebrew to English. It's just we read the story and we're like, oh yeah, and then we don't understand what's going on until we think about it a little bit more. So first we have this situation where Jehu is writing to the letters of the rulers of the Samaritan cities, to the elders, to the guardians. And he says, Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. He's basically saying, look, I've killed the king, and I'm not done yet. So, you guys have all this stuff. You guys have chariots. You guys are tough people, so go ahead and elect a new king, and let me fight against him too. And so he's basically daring them. And one of the things that he's doing here is he's setting up a scenario where he's showing no fear to them. And by doing that, he's preying upon the fact that these people are not exactly, what would we say, good people. He's actually preying upon. So one of the things that's interesting here is that when God gives judgment, he always brings judgment by giving us what we want. This happens like all the time. And
that's what's happening right now.
Yes, it is exactly. Yes, there's so many parallels. And that's the great thing is once you start to understand the Word of God and see the patterns, you'll see the patterns unfolding around you. which can come in very handy sometimes. So the thing is that if you, let's say you decide that you're going to get ahead in a company by backstabbing and lying and intrigue and those kinds of things. And we've all known people, if you've worked in any kind of big companies, you've all known somebody who that's their decision, right? They're going to get ahead by being manipulative and all that kind of stuff. Well, God will bring judgment on you by allowing you to have what you want. He'll allow you to climb through the ranks of the company, and he'll allow you to be manipulative and all those kinds of things. And a lot of times what will happen is the judgment will come because of your manipulativeness, right? Your manipulation of things will actually turn around and you'll manipulate yourself into a really bad situation. Well, what's happened here is that all of the rulers of the northern kingdom have been working for an incredibly corrupt dynasty. So how is it that you get ahead in a corrupt dynasty? Do you do that by being a really good, solid person? Do corrupt dynasties instill a lot of loyalty and a lot of honor in the hierarchies that they build up?
You do unto others before they do unto you.
Right, exactly. So you can see things like a great example of this is in, for instance, the First or Second Gulf Wars. So the United States is fighting against Iraq in both of those, right? And Iraq at the time has the fourth largest army in the world. And so you think to yourself, wow, this is going to be tough. This is going to be something. And the problem is, as soon as the war starts, you guys probably remember, if you're old enough to remember the first Gulf War, like we were all like, I remember the TV every night was like, this is going to be another Vietnam. We're dragging ourselves into a quagmire. This is going to be, right? Yeah. We heard that over and over and over again. And yet, as soon as the war started, you remember just the droves of people, of enemy soldiers that were surrendering. That, I remember watching a video of a guy in an Apache helicopter that took like 140 prisoners. Yeah, and the helicopter's flying, and all these guys come out with their hands up, and so he hovers there, and he's basically motioning them to walk that way, and they just all start walking that way, and he's like, okay, and then he just flies on, and all that stuff was happening. Well, why does that happen? Well, the thing is that if in the way that the hierarchy works, the top of the hierarchy ends up representing all of the hierarchy, right? And so if you have corruption at the top, what are you going to have all the way down? Corruption, right? You can't, the head of the hierarchy is always the embodiment of the hierarchy. And so the hierarchy becomes what he is. And the thing that's funny about this is that these corrupt leaders don't understand why they have so many problems. Like Saddam Hussein had body doubles, and he was going around, and this was even before the war started. He would go around and he'd spend his nights in a different palace every night, right? And why did he have all this stuff? Because he was always worried about being assassinated. Why? Because he would assassinate people all the time. Yeah. And so he created a hierarchy that was built on assassination. Well, you can't build your career on assassination and then expect the hierarchy to be built on anything other than assassination, right? So what happens here is that by writing to this, he's basically playing upon the fact that these guys are cowardly and they're looking out for themselves. And he's basically saying, look, if you guys, all you guys are serving this household of Ahab, and so certainly you guys are, loyal to the house of Ahab, and certainly you're willing to fight for the house of Ahab, so get yourself ready because I'm coming after you. And he knows that by doing that these guys, they have no interest in fighting. Why? Why would you fight for a corrupt regime? Why would you do that? See, this guy Jehu, he's not stupid. In fact, he knows the system very well. He's one of those guys that probably is not the kind of guy that you want to have as a neighbor. But you have to kind of admire the fact that he is smart enough to see the system that he's in and to see the weakness of the system that he's in and exploit the system. And so Ahab's family actually comes to ruin mostly on the fact that they've built up this structure that is built on things that are antithetical to the way that God wants these structures built. Okay, so that's the first thing he says, but then they say, oh, no, you don't understand. We don't want to fight for this regime. And so we're not going to put anybody on the throne. You do what you think is right. And so then the next thing he says them is, and this is really interesting the way that he words it, is he says, let's see where it's at. Then he wrote to them a second letter in verse 6, if you are on my side and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now, we don't understand the play on words here that is in Hebrew, even though it actually exists in English as well. So what is he actually asking them to do by saying, take the heads of the sons and bring them there? In that culture, it's a lot more obvious just because even though the play on words exists in Hebrew and in English, the idea of the head is much more prominent there. So what does it mean to bring the head of something? So if I say bring the head of ExxonMobil to my meeting tomorrow, what are you going to bring? The guy in charge, right? You're going to bring the guy in charge. So in that culture, the term head can mean somebody's noggin. It can mean their literal head, but it can also mean the leader, just like it can in English. But in that culture, it's a lot more common to refer to the leader as the head. So it stands out, even though it's in English and Hebrew, it would stand out much more in Hebrew, this play. And so he's telling them, bring the head there. Now, again, I think that this is the cunning of Jehu, that he knows what they're going to do. He's wording this way for a reason. He knows that he's dealing with not only people who are self-seeking, because that's the hierarchy that's been built, but he also is dealing with people who have no qualms about killing. He's dealing with people who have no compunctions when it comes to meting out violence. He's dealing with a self-centered and violent hierarchy. And so he says, hey, bring the heads of the sons there. And they don't show up with the leaders of the sons. They show up with the heads of the sons in the basket. And so that sheds light on why this plays out the way that he does. He says, as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons, slaughtered them. This is verse 7. Slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him they have brought the heads of the king's sons, he knows that they didn't bring the leaders. He knows that they brought their heads because he says, lay them in 2 heaps. Like if they were the leaders, like how you lay people in 2 heaps, right? Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. Then in the morning when he went out, he stood to all the people. He says, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. Saying, look, I conspired against the king. I killed him. That's on me. And then he says, but who struck down all these? He's like, look, I didn't tell you to kill them. Right? So he's... Yeah.
He knew what they were.
He knew what they were going to do. He's like, look,
just bring me the folks.
I'll take the rap for going against the king, but who's going to take the rap for all these guys? That's on you, because I didn't tell you to kill them. I said to bring the heads.
Hello.
Yeah.
I assume these are all grown men.
Oh yeah, they're grown men.
They would have children.
They could have. It could have been that there were some children among them, but generally speaking, you're dealing with grown men. So they'll say the son of or youths or something like that. And youths back then were anybody that wasn't like 35, 40, like anybody who didn't have maturity was a youth. So you can't always take our ideas of what they're describing and just translate it to that, because the way that they term things are completely different. It is possible, though, that the kind of people that he's dealing with, it's completely possible that there would have been younger people there. But we shouldn't assume that. Generally speaking, we're talking about older people. So he's basically putting it all back on them, and he's he's saying, look, now you guys have blood on your hands, and so don't be thinking that you're innocent in all this and you were just doing what you were told. You interpreted what I said based on your predisposition to evil. And so that's another way that, again, God always uses the things, he uses our evil against us. And that becomes important. If you guys wouldn't mind looking up, and we'll get to it, let me know when you've got there. Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. So we'll get there in a second, because one of the things that's interesting is that there's some passages in the Bible that talk about God and evil in strange ways that make us uncomfortable. But we actually have to understand this principle of how God actually deals with the world to understand what he means by that. So do you have it? Isaiah 45:7. Go ahead and read that.
I form light and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things.
Okay, so he says, I form light and I form darkness. I form well-being and I form calamity. Now that word there, calamity, is translated in some versions as I create evil. So depending on what version you have, this becomes a passage that, Isaiah 45:7, that becomes really a problem for a lot of people. And so if you're a Calvinist, maybe your answer is, well, yeah, God creates everything, and humans don't have agency. But the issue here is that word evil actually has a much broader meaning in Hebrew than it does in English. So when we talk about evil in English, we generally mean moral evil. Okay, but evil in Hebrew can mean a lot of different things. Evil, if you're sick, that's evil, right? Because health is goodness, and so sickness is evil. Are you hungry? That's evil. Why? Because being well fed, being full, being satiated, that's goodness, and so being hungry is evil. So in their world, everything in existence is kind of split into two. And you have good on one side and evil on the other. That's the way that it is. You have a bad harvest this year, that's evil. Why? Because a good harvest is good. That's the way that they think of things. And so what that really means is that God is saying, look, I create good situations, but I also create bad situations for people. Now, how does God create these bad situations without being morally responsible for evil? So we have two categories here. We have the idea of calamitous situations, calamities, and then we have the idea of moral evil. And the Hebrew uses the same word for all of it. We make a distinction. We say this moral aspect of evil, we call that evil, and these other things we call bad luck, bad situations, bad outcomes. We don't really call that moral evil. And there is a distinction to be made here, and the idea is that God creates bad outcomes for people, but he doesn't create moral evil. So the question is, how can God create bad outcomes, but not create moral evil? So the idea here is that God is bringing judgment against Ahab's family, but by doing that, is God creating moral evil? This is a pretty terrible thing that's happening. When you look at Jezebel, and she gets dashed on the rocks, and blood sprays on the wall, the animals come and eat. I mean, that's pretty rough stuff. And then now the stuff that's happening here. So the thing is God is bringing about this situation, but is he responsible in bringing about this situation for any kind of moral evil? Right. The idea is that this is a response to moral evil that's happening. And what God does is he brings justice.
He's allowing the fulfillment of their choices to be made fully fruited or fully...
Right. So the thing that's happening here is that the evil that they've sown is now being reaped, and God is just. So if God brings a calamitous situation, it's because that's just under the circumstances. Now, that becomes a problem for us too. So we say, well, what about an earthquake?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so is that, we look at that and say, well, all these innocent people died in the earthquake. Is that really what happened? See, our view of innocence is very different from God's view of innocence, right?
First off, nobody's innocent, so everybody is on borrowed time. We
Right.
deserve to be killed immediately.
Our view of innocence is very relative, right? This person's innocent. Why is that? Well, because they haven't murdered anybody. Our view of innocence is very much relative to people we think are really bad. If you're not that bad, then you're innocent. But that's not the way that God views it, is that if you've sinned, if you've done something wrong, then you've contributed and you've ratified this idea of evil and sin, and you've ratified a world in which this is okay. So as an example, let's say this. You have a little kid, and the little kid hits his brother. And then the brother comes back and hits the other kid twice, right? And the first kid that hit his brother to start with runs to his mom and says, "My brother hit me." And so the mom comes and she investigates and she says, "What happened here?" And the brother says, "Well, he hit me first, and so I hit him back." And the first brother says, "Yes, but he hit me twice. He should be punished. I'm innocent, he's not." Well, is that the way that it really works? Well, no, because by starting this, you're ratifying a situation where when I feel angry, I'm going to hit. But then you can't get mad about the fact that there's degrees and different, you know what I'm saying? You've ratified the use of violence here. And so you can't be too sad when it comes back on you. And you can try to parse exactly, well, how much, but once you've ratified the system, you can't really be too upset when it doesn't go exactly your way, right? God's job is to weigh those things, and in God's weighing of stuff, which is a lot more exact, a lot more precise, a lot more comprehensive than us, you know, when you get born into this situation and the fact that as a human being, you're born into this sinful world, it's like this. Let's take another example, and maybe this one is a little bit better for us. Let's say this. Japan bombs us in 1941, right? So December 7, 1941, they bomb Pearl Harbor, and then I think it was about 4 to 7 months later, somewhere in that, there was the Doolittle Raid. You guys remember the Doolittle Raid? So Jimmy Doolittle, who was, I think, a colonel at the time, wasn't he? He gets in these B-25s, which are two-engine bombers, and they're not supposed to be able to fly off of aircraft carriers. But he takes a lot of the weight out and does this stuff and gets some well-trained pilots that they can actually fly these big bombers off of the deck of aircraft carriers. And we sent some of our aircraft carriers, we snuck them as close to Japan as we could, and they took off, and they actually bombed Tokyo. And then the idea was that they were supposed to fly to China after that. It didn't exactly work out. But they bombed Tokyo. And the Japanese were shocked, right? And some civilians got killed. And so let's say this. Let's say so you have some random guy was sitting there, you know, drinking his tea, and a bomb comes through his roof and he gets killed. And if we could interview him after his death, and he could say, "Well, I'm innocent." And what would the response be? No, you're not. Now, here's the thing. And he could say, "I'm against the war. I'm against what my country did. I'm against the fact that my country bombed them." Well, the fact that...
Because of what his country did.
Right. The fact that they are the covenant head of that people, and they decided to declare war. Well, actually, they didn't really declare it. They made acts of war against us. A state of war now exists, and you're going to get caught up in that because of the covenant head. In the same way, when Adam sins, he sins as the covenant head of humanity. And then when we get caught up in things like earthquakes and all this kind of stuff, we can't really say, "Well, hey, it wasn't me." Well, God's looking at it and going, "Well, you guys have actually declared war on me, and you did that when Adam did that. And just like when a country declares war, you're at war with that other, whether you want to be or not." That's the way that it works. In the same way, that's the way that it works with God as well. So God doesn't do evil in these situations. What God does is God does justice. And we might not like the idea of justice, but here's the thing. What happens if I object to the idea of a covenant head representing me and bringing me into war with God? What happens if I object to that idea?
You're at war with your own leadership? Or?
Well, no, I say, look, I don't like the fact that Adam's sin actually brings me into enmity with God. I don't like that fact. I want to stand on my own. I want to be judged on my own.
Aren't you? That's just a...
Means you reject Jesus as well.
Right.
Yeah, you're
Right.
changing who you're rejecting.
Right.
If God's here and Adam's here, you're saying no to Adam, which is still in line with God.
Right. And the biggest problem is that I've rejected the foundation for my salvation in Jesus Christ. See, just like I get accredited to be at war with God because of what Adam did, I get also accredited to be at peace with God because of what Jesus did. And if I reject the principle of a covenant head, I'm rejecting the very foundation for my salvation. You see what I'm saying? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, I don't like this whole covenant head situation. Well, okay, then now you're on your own. And the thing is that we could say that as a nation, right? I don't like the fact that, people, no matter who's president, well, he's not my president. Nope, he sure is. You want to work in cooperation with everybody. You want the benefits of living in this country. That comes with who's selected as president is your covenant head. And it doesn't matter what stupid thing they do. They could get you into a war with somebody. They can do all kinds of dumb things. You get to live with that. If you don't like it, you got to move somewhere else. That's the way that it works in our system, right? That's your covenant head. And the only way of being around that is to remove yourself from that group and all of the benefits that accrue to you by being part of that group. So that's the idea here, is that God actually works by being just. And just like, we have this problem through Adam, we also have this salvation through Jesus. And the foundations for both of those are the same. And so don't complain too much about the fact that, sometimes, you get caught up in things like earthquakes and forest fires and, stuff like that. But you also get Jesus. So,
This is interesting because I have wondered in the past, that surely not everyone in every Jew was evil.
right,
Or sinning.
right.
But yet they all suffered the same thing
Yep.
corporately.
Uh-huh.
Will that explain?
Exactly. And so here's another aspect to this, and this isn't really where we were going to go, but this is kind of an important one because it really helps you to understand this. So the question will be, well, why does the church have to endure suffering? So the idea, you could say, well, the first century church, they are persecuted by the Jewish people, and then Jerusalem falls in 70 AD, and then after that, they're persecuted for a couple hundred years by the Roman Empire, and some of the persecutions, like under Nero and some of the other guys, were just awful persecutions. And there's always this kind of plea that the church gives is, how long, O Lord, how long? And the question is, well, why? Why does the church go through those things? Because the church is now, their covenant head is Christ. So why do we as Christians have to endure forest fires and earthquakes? And more importantly, why do we have to endure the evil of the world if we're now under Christ?
We're bearing the burdens of the sins of the world as
Yeah.
Christ did for us.
When Christ, exactly, when Christ bears the sins of the world to the cross, and he says, if they treated me this way, they're going to treat you this way, and so you have to take up your cross and you have to carry the sins as well. What he's saying is, look, when you're left behind in the world as my presence in the world, you're not suffering for your own sins anymore. You're suffering for the sins of the world. So here's the thing, you hurt your leg. When you get to heaven, that's not going to happen. So why do you have to endure it now? Because you're suffering. Christ left the church here as a witness to the world to bring the world to redemption in him, and you're suffering right now as part of that.
So you should dance.
Right.
And celebrate.
So the thing is, it would be great. It would be great if every time, when we got baptized as Christians, we were immediately taken up to heaven. That would be fantastic. But then who who would be down here on earth to represent Christ to other people. So, the thing is, we talk about suffering for Christ, and oftentimes we think about, well, unless I'm on the mission field dying of dysentery, then I'm not really suffering for Christ, because that's what the real suffering. Now, again, I'm not going to compare, like sitting on my couch watching Netflix because I have the flu with, dying of dysentery on the mission field. These are two way different levels, but the principle is the same. The principle is that I am suffering because my job is to bring Christ to the people that I'm around. And the reason that God has left me here and not taken me straight to heaven is because I'm to be Christ's presence here, and I have to bear the sins of the world just like they do. Now, here's the thing. So my suffering can either be worthwhile or it can be kind of not worthwhile. The thing is, if I'm here and I have to suffer, I might as well redeem that suffering by actually representing Christ to the world, by actually trying to bring people to, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're going to have to do it anyway.
Right.
You might as well make it worthwhile and you might as well give it meaning by actually fulfilling that part. How terrible is it to go through this and God says, look, I'm going to leave you in the world and you're going to have to suffer, and you're doing this to represent me. Christ says, you're doing this to represent me. And then you go through all that suffering, but you don't actually represent him. I mean, it's foolish, right? It's like you go through the terrible pain of a surgery, and then at the end of it, your arm's still broken and not set right. And I remember when I was a kid and I broke my wrist. They went to set it, and it was a horribly painful experience. I won't go into it because some people just, it'll make you like vomitous. The first time they did it, it didn't work. And they said, well, we're going to have to try this again. And I'm like, no. And I actually said to them, I said, I'm going to pass out if we don't give me a second right here. And I thought to myself, just give me a surgery, because they talked about if they couldn't get it set, they were going to operate on it. Just give me the surgery. Don't make me endure that again. I mean, enduring it to get your bones straight is one thing, but enduring it and then have nothing is so much worse.
They knocked me out.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, well, I had dislocated it too.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I can do it, and it'll really hurt. I said, no, just go there.
Yeah, that was a good call, because it does really hurt. I had a callus fracture of this wrist, it's right before a compound fracture, so the bone is broken and out of place, but it hasn't quite broken through the skin yet. And so it was very misshapen. It was like a V. And
Is this you not talking about how bad it is? And you just said it wasn't wrong?
no, it gets a lot worse. It gets a lot worse. It gets a lot worse. So anyway, the point is, you might as well actually make that meaningful. So that's kind of the idea of the world we live in, and that's where Jehu is going with this. So let's go ahead and read verses 12 through 17 and understand the rest of how this is going to sort itself out.
Then he went out and went to Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth-Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and he said, "Who are you?" And they answered, "We are the relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother." He said, "Take them alive." And they took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth-Eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. And when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and said to him, "Is your heart true to my heart as mine is to yours?" And Jehonadab answered, "It is." Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand, and Jehu took him up with him into the chariot. And he said, "Come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he struck down all people who remained in Ahab in Samaria, till he had wiped them out, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah.
All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on here too, and we'll just go over it fairly quickly. So Ahaziah is king of Judah. Remember, we have the northern kingdom, Samaria, Israel, could be called either. And then we have the southern kingdom, which is Judah. And the southern kingdom is where the temple is, it's where Jerusalem is, it's where all that stuff's going on. Now,
Real quick
Yes.
clarification. Ahab was Israel.
Ahab was Israel, Samaria.
And Jehu is replacing Ahab in.
Right, in Israel. And so the question becomes, so why is Jehu just running amok here? Because now we have relatives of the king of the south, and Jehu's like, oh, I'm going to kill them too. He's just killing everybody he comes along. Jehu just seems to be like one of those berserker guys who's just kind of gone off the rails. So what's happening here? Remember that there's been this problem relationship between the north and the south, where some of the southern kings, even some of the good ones, have decided to have a relationship with the north without the north actually getting its act together. And that relationship included intermarriage. And so these relatives of Ahaziah are descendants of Ahab. So that's why they're getting killed. So once you decide to... So here's the thing that's interesting. This idea of covenant head means that you will share in the outcome of your covenant head. So if our covenant head is Adam, we share in the outcome of Adam. If our covenant head is Christ, we share in the outcome of Christ. This is always the way that it works. And so you have to be really careful who you make your covenant head, who you join with. And one of the interesting things that we'll actually be mentioning in the sermon is that when you make choices, what you're doing is you're joining yourself to an outcome. Right? So that's what you're doing. Now, we don't think of it that way. We think of a choice as like a mental exercise, almost like belief. But that's not the way that the Bible views it. The Bible views it as when you make a choice, you're actually joining yourself to a set of outcomes or consequences. You're joining yourself to a fate.
Proverbs is full of the path you're choosing. It
Right.
leads to a location.
Yeah.
That's where you're going.
Proverbs is all about this concept. It really is all about this concept that when you choose, you don't realize this is what you're doing, but you're actually joining yourself to a covenant head. You're joining yourself to an outcome of fate. And generally the way that this actually works is that you're actually choosing, when you choose anything, you're choosing a God, and you're choosing the outcome of that God. You're choosing the fate of that God. And the reason for that is because, again, the Bible doesn't frame choosing a God as choosing belief, but in worship. So we tend to think about, we ask people, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God? And they say, yeah. And we're like, oh, great. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but your kid starts dating somebody and you go, oh, well, do they believe in God? Yeah, they believe in God. Oh, great. And sometimes that ends up meaning something, and sometimes it doesn't end up meaning something. Because really, the idea of belief is not central to the conception of the Bible when it comes to our relationships to God's. The idea of worship is central. And worship means value. It means valuing something. It means declaring the value of something. And so when you make choices, that's the way that we declare value, is the choices that we make. It's not the beliefs that we hold, it's the choices that we make. So for instance, if I choose, say I have little kids at home and I choose to work 90 hours a week, I've declared my God. And it doesn't matter what I say I believe in. It really boils down to the choices that I make. Because the choices that I make actually declare my value system. They actually show my value. They're the manifestation of my value system. And so that's what we do when we're making choices. And those are choices all the time. If I choose to sit at home and binge watch Netflix, all day, every day, and, eat ice cream incessantly, then, sounds great. Yeah, exactly. I'm actually worshiping my God at that point. I'm combining. I'm choosing. What's the best way to say this? Affirming. Yeah, but it's really more of I'm uniting myself to an outcome. And this is what happens all the time, is people are like, well, this is not the outcome that I wanted. Well, but that's not, it's not the way that it works. We have this view that we can make one choice but have a different outcome, and that's to misunderstand the whole nature of choices, which we do all the time. All right, so let's finish up here. We can't. It's too long. It's too long. I guess we'll go ahead and read. Let's go 18 through. Let's go 18 through 24. We'll read this first paragraph.
Then Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, and all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu did it with cunning in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered, Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it, and Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. He said to him who was in charge of the wardrobe, Bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. So he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshippers of Baal, Search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal. Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings.
Okay, so Jehu here has decided, again, to use cunning to lie to them and bring them all in. We're going to have this big party. I'm going to be more into this than everybody else. And so what happens is, I'll go ahead and finish up reading this. It's the end of 24 here. It says, Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside and said, The man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life. So as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the officers, Go in and strike them down, let not a man escape. So when they went and put him to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. And they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. All right, so lots of stuff going on here. And part of the issue we wanted to talk about, we're way past time, aren't we?
Sure.
Holy cow, for some reason I was thinking we were going to end at 10:30. We started late and ended late. Well, we got to stop. We'll pray and then we'll get you guys out of here. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessings that you've given us. We ask that you'd help us to understand these words of yours, and we ask that you'd help us to implement them in our lives. And we thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
You want to Fran